All right, good morning. So, welcome to KXP 101 again for week 8. So thank you guys for coming in. I had a feeling that there would be lower attendance this week compared to last week, mostly because who wants to take a 2-day holiday in the middle of the week when you can take a 3-day holiday on the weekend? So I understand the logic. So for those of you listening at home, this lecture will be important again if you need to get some help with assessment 2, and we'll also be talking in this lecture about the sports industry, and then actually instead of having 2 guest speakers, Joe Gray, who is an artist manager, sent me an email frantically yesterday to say that she couldn't make it today, so I've sent her an email back to say, can you come attend next Friday? So hopefully things work out and she can attend next Friday. But today we'll have Brian Crawford. He'll be walking into the lecture room around 10 a.m. and his work is mostly to do with television commercials, where he plays many different roles such as director of photography, producer, stills photographer, all those types of things. So he'll be talking about his kind of like the skills that he uses in each of the tasks and projects that he works on. So that could give you some more additional information that you could use in your assessment. Okay. So with tutorials, this week we were talking about your structure, signposting, introduction, and conclusion. What I found in Monday tutorials was that most students weren't able to get to that point yet. They were still kind of selecting, I guess, they were still trying to figure out, okay, what sectors do I think I want to work in, what am I interested in, choosing a piece of content, choosing a role, and then choosing a skill. So they hadn't completed that game plan slide from the previous lecture. So we'll see how we go in tutorials this week again. Next week, I would like you guys to bring, if you can, a draft introduction, and also if you can show us one example of your writing, so one written paragraph, if possible. See ya. And then remember, week 10, that's when you have tutorials. That's when you have no tutorials. But if you need help, make sure that you can email your tutors accordingly and appropriately. Okay, so some people are still thinking, apparently it wasn't clear enough in the last lecture, or actually the people that I asked who had issues with the assessment weren't actually at the lecture last week, or hadn't looked at the slides, hadn't looked at the assessment. But anyway, for those people who want additional clarification to help you think and frame about assessment 2, because I know it sounds like you're writing about 2 different pieces, 2 random industries where you don't compare and contrast, and that kind of doesn't really work in your mind. So for example, if you think about it like this, if you frame your introduction or what you are writing in your mind as related to this idea that industry professionals require a diverse set of skills, okay? So then you can start to see, okay, I understand that, that's why we're speaking about 2 different skills in this particular essay. So then you can go, well, we can look at 2 different entertainment sectors to understand some of those skills which are transferable, that are needed in order to complete a certain task or a certain project, right? So how are you guys sitting with that? Does that help you think about assessment 2 in that way? Cool, getting some notes. Okay, cool, thumbs up. Sweet. So, and then you can drill down even further by saying something like, okay, if that's what we're concerned with, we can specifically look or gain insight into the importance of this particular skill by looking or investigating this particular piece of content that I've experienced. All right, how does that sit with you guys? That's better you're kind of understanding the logic behind the essay? Cool. Cool, cool. The other thing that you need to remember is that don't get carried away researching too much about the role. Or I should say rather, don't get carried away writing too much about the role. Because the assessment is really focused on your analysis of a particular skill, right? It's about the skill. Now, I've been saying this in a whole bunch of tutorials, is that if you write about the role as well, if you analyze the role as well as the skill, that's too much information that you cannot fit into a 1,000-word essay, okay? With that said, I'm not saying you can't speak about the role, because in order to speak about the skill, you need to give enough context, enough background information about what this role is and how that person in that role uses that particular skill. Does that make sense? So you would only look at a specific aspect of that role as related to a certain skill. Okay, how are we going with that? Sounds good? Right, skills rather than roles. Okay, I've noticed in tutorials as well that some people are having, they need a little bit more guidance with figuring out what research they can use for their assessment, right? So, what I'm saying is that when you do research, you do not have to find articles on the actual professionals who worked on the content that you have experienced and that you want to talk about. So say, for example, you've seen the latest Infinity Wars. Hands up who's seen it already? Don't tell me anything. I'm going to see it on Sunday. So you do not, for example, if you're writing about Infinity Wars for this assessment as your specific piece of content, and then you want to look at a producer role in Infinity Wars, you do not have to find news articles that have information about the behind the scenes of that thing, of a producer working on Infinity Wars specifically. Does that make sense? Because chances are most of you who have experienced a particular type of content or have chosen a particular type of content for your essay and choosing a certain role with it, you won't be able to find a news article or an interview about that particular thing. So, because if you do find that stuff, like interviews about behind the scenes with producers or whatever, that's great. You can use that. That's fine. But for those of you who cannot find that information, what you should be doing is that second point there. So, you need to find information about the role in general and the skill that you're looking at, and you use that to make inferences to illustrate what you think went on behind those scenes. So your essay might sound something like, okay, for this musical theater production that I went to see, a producer needs this type of skill. This news article about producers in theater in general says X, Y, Z, right? And then you go, well, if I use that information, then I take that and say, okay, well, if that's the case, then the producers or the people, the stage managers or whoever working on this musical theater production would need this skill to do X, Y, Z in that production. So you take that information and you kind of transplant it into for your specific purpose. Remember what we talked about in assessment 1 was that if you find information that doesn't exactly say what you want it to, you'll need to take that information and take parts of it and adapt it to what you want to argue or communicate or support. How's that? You guys with me on that? Cool. All right, good. So your sources could be about It could be about a professional who is discussing their advice, their experiences, or they might be discussing something related to the issues or challenges that their industry is facing. So they may not even say, okay, you need to have this skill, all right? So what I said last week in the lecture is if you find that information, where they're giving descriptions of things, their advice, you need to work backwards and work indirectly. You need to reverse engineer that information to go, okay, if this is what they're experiencing, if this is what they're doing, if this is what they're responsible for, then in order to do that efficiently, to do that properly, they need to have this particular skill. That make sense? Cool. There will be a number of students as well that if you're looking for, like say for example, if you're talking about a skill related to do with like teamwork or leadership or like scheduling and responsibility, all those other things, the places that you would often find that like academic stuff would usually be like business management literature. So what I'm trying to say is if you use the search function in Qt Library and you find skills, articles about skills, and they're from a completely different discipline, they're not related to entertainment, they might be related to business, that's cool. Use that information and make it work for the context, okay? So that is absolutely acceptable as well. The other thing that I should say is that some of you might be using sources or evidence from like job role descriptions. Like a website might have a whole list of this is what a producer does, this is what a script developer does, etc. That's cool, because those industry websites usually don't disappear. And those roles, the lists of roles and their general descriptions will not disappear. However, avoid using actual job descriptions. What I mean by that is the advertised job descriptions. Because if you cite that stuff in your assessment and that job happens to disappear like the week after or the day after you submit, we cannot verify that it was an actual source, okay? So those links will disappear because the job will be closed and people will have applied for it. Okay. The other thing I needed to speak about is this. So some of you are going, okay, well, you said last week we have to talk about our experiences. Yes, that's true. So what you would say is, the way you would use your experiences is in describing that with examples. So for example, your experience of the content is used to frame the importance of the skill. So if the professional didn't possess X, or the skill X, then the audiences wouldn't have been able to experience, and then you would insert what you actually experienced there, like a specific aspect of your experience, where it works. Is that cool with you guys? Cool, sweet. All right, the other thing I wanted to say was that when you integrate evidence, you need to make sure that you do it in a way where you're not just dumping like a paragraph quote. I will say it now, and we'll see how many people listen to this advice. The actual recording of this lecture and this specific spot is do not use block quotes in this essay. The reason for that is because if you use a block quote of maybe 100, 150 words, that eats up 100 and 150 words that you cannot use to explain your ideas, okay? So we expect that you provide us with evidence that is paraphrased, okay? Because that shows that you can understand the information that you're researching and put it in a written context that the reader will be able to understand. The only exception to this rule is that if you find a quote and a specific section of a quote that you believe cannot be rewritten and you believe exemplifies the idea as best can be communicated, then you do not change the author's words. However, I contest that. That's okay, but there are always ways to write something in your own words, in your own voice. Okay, so if I see any quotes, I will be checking to see that they're integrated properly, etc. Okay, so this is the one part, and listen carefully, this is the one part of essays that is done really poorly. So, rather than me giving you general feedback after you guys submit assessment 2, I'll give you what we call, well, the phrase is called feed forward. So I'm telling you what students need to improve on so that you know that you can do this before you submit. So this will improve your learning and show evidence that you've listened to this lecture, etc. Okay, so the bit in essays that's usually done quite poorly and needs more improvement is this bit here, explaining how the evidence actually supports the topic sentence, how it actually supports the idea in the topic sentence or the idea of the paragraph. Okay? That's the most important bit. So usually what students will do, and I've been guilty of doing this in undergrad as well, and I've learned pretty quickly not to, if I wanted to earn more marks, I learned pretty quickly that this third point is really important, because that third point of commenting and analyzing the evidence, it really shows your ideas, it shows your authority on a subject, on an idea. It shows your voice, it shows that you're able to analyze something and make it your argument, make an argument out of it. So students usually go topic sentence, yep, evidence, check, and then concluding transition sentence, that's it. They miss that third bit. So when I mean evidence, they usually just drop in a couple of sentences as quotes and say, okay, that's cool, I'm done, whatever. No, try and avoid doing that. So really try and work on that third point there. And one of the ways to do that and to help you think about doing this for future essays that you have to write for creative industries is this kind of statement here. So and it's the statement that my PhD supervisor told me as well. He said, don't let the quotes or evidence make the argument or state the argument for you. So they will provide you information and data, right? But your job is to explain how that information, how that data is relevant. Are you guys all with me? Cool. Guys at the back, can you see this? No, okay, cool. Plan B. Can you see that? Better, okay, I'll zoom in. Okay, so for example, this is it from SiteRite, and it's essentially a fidget. It looks to be what is a fidget spinner. Yeah, you see it now, it's like, oh yeah, fidget spinner. I think they did that on purpose. Anyway, the structure of this fidget spinner is essentially the structure of your paragraph. Or part of the structure of your paragraph. So it says, okay, the first bit is, what are you trying to communicate? So what is the topic sentence? What is the idea in the topic sentence? What are you claiming? What are you arguing? What are you communicating? That's the first point. So that's your topic sentence. And then you go, okay, the left side there, you go, okay, well, this is the evidence that supports that idea. Great. So you provide data and statistics, information, etc.
Now, that's where students usually get to. So this is just a little bit of a different way of putting what I was saying before. That highlighted bit, that is the bit where we really critique you and go, okay, this student knows exactly what they're talking about. This student knows why they've used this particular piece of evidence to communicate and support the idea. So always try and get to that third step. Why does this evidence support your claim? And you'll get better at doing this as you go on. So that's why we want to see in tutorials next week evidence or examples of your writing, so we can assess this and we can give you feedback and go, okay, I think you've gone in depth enough about the relevance of why this evidence is important, or we could tell you you need to work on that a little bit more and think a little bit more on it. Cool, okay. So I did say this. So your checklist for next week, we would like a draft introduction and a draft of one body paragraph of your choice. So that's what we need next week in order for the tutorial to work properly. Okay, any questions about the assessment so far? Has that kind of mini walkthrough or like more clarification helped you guys? Cool, excellent, good. If not, just send me an email and say I didn't really understand X, Y, Z. If you don't want to put your hand up, whatever, and I'll be happy to explain it in further detail with you.